meeting, and this meeting is held in accordance with the Freedom of Information Act. The news media has been notified. A copy of the agenda has been made available to the public. All persons wishing to attend this virtual meeting may do so via YouTube, Sumter School District Board Meetings, and Sumter School District's Facebook page. Due to COVID-19 and in compliance with recent public health orders, no members from the public will be able to attend the meeting in person. So those of you who are watching virtually, welcome to each and every one of you too. And at this time, we'll have a meditative thought. Amen. Now we'll have our pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Present for our committee from our board is Trustee Brian Austin, Trustee Cheryl Ray, and Trustee Mike McLeod, and our Superintendent, Dr. Martin Knox. Now, Dr. Martin Knox, do we have other staff participating via Zoom?
Yes, sir, we do. We have Mr. Samuel Myers with us, Ms. Jennifer Miller, Mr. Brian Jones, Ms. Shelley Galloway, Dr. Brenda Hafner, Dr. Jada McLeod, and Dr. John Kunis.
Thank you for y'all for attending, and good evening to y'all as well. What I would like to begin with is kind of go back to, well, is it by consensus? All right, yeah. If there's no objections, the agenda will stand by consensus. Okay. The thing that I would like to begin with is kind of get a recap. I know we've had the minutes from, I believe, 2 meetings from the previous ad hoc committee, and I would just like to kind of get some feedback, since y'all have been down this road before, and kind of share some things that, due to probably the pandemic and everything else, you didn't get as far along with doing, and maybe using that as a spring point to move forward. So whoever wants to jump in at that. Brian?
At our last meeting in February of 2020, we discussed nominations for student representative, as well as a parent representative to serve on the committee. My memory serves correctly, we had a recommendation that came from our transportation department of a transportation worker that would serve on the committee. I think they were from Zone 3, if I'm not mistaken. We had a representative from Zone 3 that was going to serve on the committee. There was discussion amongst the board after we took back the names of the parents or the students about making sure there was representation across the county. And that's kind of where we left off. We discussed some things as far as pressing transportation issues across the district with our transportation bus routes when it comes to our attendance lines, things of that sort, were some of the issues that were discussed amongst committee members at the time.
Okay. Ms. Ray, you were on the committee also, correct?
Yes, and that covered it. We did have some presentations from the area transportation supervisors to kind of give us an overview of transportation, so we did that also.
Okay. And I know, like y'all have alluded, and everybody's aware, the pandemic kind of put a stop to everything. Matt, were you on the committee also?
I was not.
You're new to it?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. But I'm sure you're familiar with transportation since you're a former bus driver. And I'm a former bus driver too. So times have changed, so
A little bit.
they have changed a little bit. Okay, Now, let me come back to pose a question to, following up on what you shared, Brian, to Dr. Martin Knox. How far did we get on getting our outside representatives on the committee?
So, good evening again, members of the Sumter School District Board and to our community. We actually collected information from our principals. We asked our principals to reach out to individuals in their communities to see who would be available and willing to participate. And so we have received a host of names, but I know that we wanted to keep the groups and the participants at a smaller number than what we received. And we also wanted a diverse group of representatives that reflects Sumter School District as a whole. We actually have those names and had those names, but we kind of came to a stop when there was some concerns about whether the schools were in very rural areas versus in the city area, and the students that we had selected. There was one individual who was of elementary age, and there was a recommendation that we selected another student who was a little older. We also wanted to make sure that the individuals would be able to remain on the ad hoc committee or the transportation committee, because the one individual we had selected was a senior. And so had we had that individual, we wouldn't have gained any traction because we haven't been in school because of the pandemic. And so we still have to list names, and there are individuals out there who were willing to participate, but we actually utilize our principals to garner support. Brian Jones and Mr. Myers actually had dialogue with transportation staff to have them as participants on the committee, because as they're doing the work, it's most important that we get their feedback. So we still have that list of names, and we can go back and revisit those and make recommendations to you all for participation. We also talked about having recurring themes and having subgroups participate on those groups or the teams, so that we could again elicit more feedback from the community, the greater community of Sumter School District.
Okay, thank you. Now, let me pose this to the committee and staff. Certainly share your ideas too. Since we have completed the school year with those folks that would have been, but they never really got started, is a good starting point now to identify another group, or do we want to use some of those individuals? If that senior, of course that senior would be gone and graduated, where do we want to start so we can pick up with the momentum that y'all had started, but due to the pandemic everything got slowed down?
I think we may need to go back and revisit, because I'm not sure of how many of those parents are still parents of children within our district.
Okay.
And so we need to make sure that, one, their children are still in the district and that they have access to transportation, because that was the other component, making sure we had children and parents who were actually bus riders.
Okay. How do y'all feel?
I agree.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay, now, and that's something that our superintendent will work, soliciting information and feedback from our principals or our transportation folks to bring a group of names.
Is the transportation worker that was identified, are they still willing to serve in that capacity?
Mr. Jones, I'm gonna leave that question to you, and I don't know if you heard the question is, was the transportation individuals we selected to participate, are they still willing and still employees of the school district?
Yes, she is, and yes, she's still currently employed.
Okay, I have a question. So we're gonna have one transportation worker, a parent, and a student. Is that what we decided?
And students from all levels, elementary, middle, and high.
Well, it was our recommendation from the school district side that we had a representative from elementary and secondary. But we can do elementary, middle, and high, or we can just do elementary and secondary, or we can just do secondary. I know that there were some concerns about having a child that was too young, that would not be able to bring any information to the district that would allow us to move forward with our plans.
And I know one thing that you pointed out, Brian, was having the geographic area of the district represented.
Mm-hmm.
So that would still be something that we would keep in mind to have out, and you know, we can cover 630 square miles, so we got a lot of territory out there geographically. All right, well, Dr. Martin Knox, we'll let you handle that aspect of it. And next thing, and I want to pose this to the committee and transportation staff, Brian. What do y'all see as the most pressing need right now as we move forward with transportation from your perspective, Brian? And then I'm going to yield to our committee members.
At this point, good afternoon, members of the Sumter School District Board. At this point, we're in need of more drivers, of course. A lot have moved to substatus, but right now we need more drivers.
Okay. And can you share a little bit how we are managing with our routes, with our hybrid schedule, and with everything that we have to do and the other duties we've sort of farmed out to transportation, like delivering meals and things like that? Could you share with us sort of how that's working?
Absolutely. Because of Israel, the numbers are low at this point, so we're able to double in some cases, triple and quadruple some routes, not to exceed our 50% capacity at this point. And so that allows us to free up drivers to do other routes to ensure that our students arrive on time and home in a safe manner. As far as our drivers, on Wednesday, we use our drivers, of course, to deliver meals, and it works as our day of deep cleaning and sanitation, and we're allowed to feed and take care of that as well.
Okay. Committee members, y'all want to jump in on that?
Mr. Jones, you spoke of the need for more drivers. Is it an issue of them having to double routes, or is it an issue of the length of their routes?
I can barely hear your question.
When you spoke of the need for additional drivers, do you think that there's a need for additional drivers because of the length of their routes, or just because of the 50% capacity? Like, what is the time that it takes to run a route? Is that an issue, or is it the length of that route?
Well, right now it's a touch and go situation. As forward, Mr. Myers and I were monitoring the situation. And as I said earlier, right now we need drivers, but because of the low numbers, we're actually able to work our magic, so to speak, to ensure that our students arrive safely and home in a timely manner.
Okay. Cheryl?
As we're looking towards getting back to school on a more normal basis, have you started making plans of how you're going to handle that with possibly still having a low percentage on the bus? Didn't you say we could go up to maybe 67%?
Yes, ma'am.
Martin Knox. What are the plans for that?
At this point, Mr. Myers and I, we've discussed at length a plan, and as we continue to revisit or view the information, the data that's actually given to us. We're looking at that in hopes of getting new drivers. We are putting it out there. We were fortunate to, even in the pandemic, I think we were able to hire 3 drivers, and we still have some subs that have flexible schedules as well. So with that being in place and the ones that we're bringing on, that's the plan that's in place currently.
Now, Ms. Myers, you want to share anything on that?
Yes, sir. Good evening.
Good evening.
In line with what Mr. Jones just shared, going back to one of the questions about why some of that has occurred, there have been some persons who have been sort of fearful about driving in reference to the pandemic itself, and we've been very much concerned about that, and some of the ones have moved on and found other positions. But what we're doing is making sure that we can get out there and beat those bushes and talk to folks who are interested. And as Mr. Jones indicated, we did hire 3 drivers, and they're still on, and we're talking to other folks. We're talking to other districts about some of the techniques and strategies and methods that they've used to try to attract drivers. And they've been losing them some as well. So we've been trying to go through many different avenues. There's a job fair that's coming up. I know that a lot of folks think that it's just only for teachers, but there are other folks out there as well. So we're going to continue to put those words out and beat those bushes so that we can find those drivers and hold on to them the best way that we can.
All right, thank you, Mike.
Yes, sir. To piggyback what Ms. Ray was asking, I don't know whether Mr. Myers or Mr. Jones can answer, but if we're going at a lower capacity on buses, do we have enough buses? Are we gonna spread those students around so that we've got fewer? Do we have enough buses operational to carry all the kids when we come back to full capacity?
Did you all hear him? You want me to answer or you got it?
No, could you repeat it? We couldn't hear all of that.
So the question is, based on the regulated capacities from CDC, DHEC, do we have enough buses to transport all of our children, or would we need buses when they return, as we are continuing to maintain the guidance from CDC? Do we have enough buses, or would we have to stagger the buses?
Well, we do. Go ahead, Mr. Jones.
No, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, we do have enough buses, but even with the buses, we still have to stagger those routes.
Correct.
Just to make sure that we can get those students. But the answer to the question is yes, we have enough buses, but we still will have to stagger at different times.
And so, Mr. Jones, why don't you do me a favor? Why don't you share with our viewers and for those who are not familiar with the process as we put forward information to acquire the appropriate number of buses for our students?
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Knox. As when it comes to the buses or the length of the route, as the question was asked, of course, we look at the data again, and we try to put the bus in as close as the proximity of another route. For example, bus A runs near bus B. In full school or regular school, we couldn't combine those routes because those routes would be full. But because of the process that we're in now, we can combine maybe A, B, and C. So that frees up 2 drivers, or it gives me 2 drivers to put on another route, if I'm, if need be. But we do have enough buses to accommodate the CDC guidelines and rules, provided we come back.
Brian?
Just to follow up on that, if we are staggering routes, will we need to look at staggering our start times or arrival times for schools, considering all the children won't arrive at the school at the same time as they normally would?
Right now, we're comfortable with what we have. Again, it's called working our magic, is what we do from day to day. So we're comfortable with the start and end times. Right now, we know what we have, and because the times are structured, we can kind of work around that. If we see where it's going to cause a problem, Mr. Myers and myself, we would definitely blow the whistle to get some help. But for now, we're comfortable with what we have.
And I think the other piece that plays a factor in this, remember a few board meetings ago, we talked about the recommendations for for the bus utilization during the pandemic. If we stay with the 50%, it would definitely pose a problem if all of our children had returned. At 67%, which is now the recommendation, and it is in documented form, 67% is what the maximum capacity would be for our children to be on the bus. And that number also fluctuates depending upon the elementary runs and the secondary runs as well, because you can fit more elementary kids on a bus, but it also would impact those students who are coming from the same household. So if we have 3 elementary kids who are coming from the same household, you can put those 3 on one seat to transport. So all those factors would be taken into consideration as well. So it's really important that, one, we have as solid of information in terms of which children will be returning to school, so we can have a number count, because it is going to be complex when we are making the determination of how we're going to get our children to and from school without major disruption to the schedule and staggering the schedule. Because if we stagger the schedule, that means our teachers have to work overtime which means that's another conversation in terms of salary and compensation. So we'll continue to monitor that and make sure we are adjusting our parameters accordingly. Like I said, the initial guidance was that you use 50% capacity, and the second guidance and the final guidance that I've seen thus far is 67%. And so we just have to be very careful to make sure that we're safeguarding our children either way.
Any other questions on the routing or what we're talking about?
Are we still, I know I heard a mention of the food distribution utilizing buses. Are we still using buses for Wi-Fi as like hotspots as well?
Mr. Myers, did you hear that? You want me to answer it or did you hear it?
I heard that, yes.
I think you're selective with what you hear.
No, I'm not. We do have our Wi-Fi buses that are still located in several different areas. We've got one in the Renwick area, right near the Renwick Post Office. We've got one at the Winchfield Post Office, one at 521 South near the Love Center, and we have one at the St. John's Center in St. John's, and those buses are there. They have to get there earlier because elementary students start early, and they're there for 4 hours, 5 hours, and we have a couple of drivers who are there, and they sort of alternate driving and being there. So it's working. They do give some updates many times. Can't tell whether anyone is coming. They may come close enough just to be able to pick up the Wi-Fi, but from all indications, everything is working pretty well.
I have a question, and I don't know if it's for Brian or Mr. Myers or Dr. Hafner. Brian, I know we get our funding from the state based on our reports we turn in with mileage and things of that nature, with our route descriptions and all of that. Have y'all gotten any information from the State Department on how that's gonna play out at the end of the year?
Mr. Thomas McCray, our bus shop supervisor, we actually just turned in our route descriptions for this year. And so, of course, you know, there's a waiting process. As far as I know, all is well. Once he enter in the data, you know how it goes. They kind of send it back for corrections or whatever. This year, we're told that we turned in what we actually did, and they will let us know from there.
Okay, all right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Now, one thing that I wanted to throw out to the committee and then bounce back to our transportation staff, Mr. Myers. I know one of the objectives that we have is to get the children to school and do it in a safe manner. But also, one of the objectives is to try to cut down on the ride time that children have. So Brian, let me throw that to you. Have y'all, when you look at your routing, have y'all looked at any possible ways to cut down on that ride time that children have? Now, I know in certain areas there's nothing you can do. For example, I'll say my area. My children are trapped, so to speak, by distance, and the only choices they got is Rafton Creek Elementary, Ebenezer Middle, and Crestwood. And we can't get them any closer unless we move some schools out there to them. So, and we got that pretty much on all corners of the county. So have y'all taken a look to see, and I'm probably leading up to looking at some rezoning issues, but have y'all had a chance to just kind of study and see how we could shorten the route time of other students who are not in that situation, like in the Pisgah area?
At this point, Mr. McCray, Thomas McCray, Mr. Myers and myself, we've talked about this before. We actually put it on the table to Thomas, and he's willing to take a look as well. Currently, as you said, because of the location and where the schools are located, it's a little difficult to kind of pinpoint some of those areas, but it is something that we can consider.
Okay, and now share with us, Thomas McCray,
He is our he's our county supervisor now.
All right, so he is willing to kind of work with us and take a look at seeing how we could do it a little more efficiently.
Correct, if at all possible, yes.
Good, good. Now, Dr. Knox.
Yes, sir. I just wanted to add another caveat to that as well, and it just reminded me, we also need to look at the delivery of special services, because there's some children, because some schools aren't offering those services, that they have to travel a much farther distance to get to their school. So Ms. Davis, who's not on the call this evening with us, we have recognized that as well, and to determine ways in which we can shorten those routes for our children who receive special services, because it's even more intense for them as well. By the time they get to school and after they've had those long journeys, their minds aren't present for learning because of the travel that they've had to endure in the mornings.
Then let me pose this question to the committee. With Mr. McCray and Brian and Mr. Myers and whomever looking at the possibility of doing that, they come back to the committee and say that this is something that we're ready to kind of throw out there, then what would be our next logical step or information to carry back to our board?
I'll take a stab at it. I think if our transportation department is able to look at the routes first, I think our recommendation would need to be is that we would need to look at an outside consultant to look at our buildings, our demographics of our county, and how close households are to certain schools. And also with the piece that Dr. Martin also shared about students with special services, how will we work that into the equation? But I think that looking at having kids go to schools that are closer to their homes as opposed to configuring lines just to shift kids to certain schools to balance out the population or whatever in that school, I think the first thing that we would need to do is have an outside person so that it's a fair process across the board, where it's not one member of the board making sure that their district is represented more than another, but to make sure that we're offering fair and equitable services to our students when it comes to transportation needs.
Okay, sure.
Well, I agree with that. We're gonna have to look at the whole county as opposed to the way it is now. We're still separated by transportation with city and county, so there could be another division of the county. And I think that's a good idea to have somebody from the outside look, because that's a complaint I get all the time from parents, that they go by a school and to go to another school, it's not as close to them. So any way we could help with that situation, and I think that would help with the ride times and all that too, with some kids now. No, all of them can't.
Mike?
I agree with what they said, I think.
And of course, what we would do is shift all that over to our superintendent, because she's got the resources, and then she would kind of begin to assuming we throw that out of the board, because she's the one that we got working for us. So it would be her obligation, responsibility to look at that.
Even though getting an outside consultant, I think Mr. Jones has been around this county and all over this county. I think he needs to have some input in that.
He definitely does.
And actually help that consultant.
He knows the ins and outs, and it's key, in my opinion, to have somebody that,
Right.
And Brian, you referred to as working magic, and I know how that works. I know how that works at the end of the day. 2 hours before school dismissal, you gotta juggle 6 drivers to get something covered. So it truly is working magic, and I admire all the transportation people, every one of them that play a role, because it is truly a hectic job, but y'all get it done and do a wonderful job with it. But ultimately, I think that is something that our board is gonna have to come to terms with. And just like you said, Cheryl, I hear that concern quite often, that My child has to ride by one school that's geographically closer to home to go to another, Dr. Martin Knox.
And just 2 points, to the points that were made in terms of children bypassing schools to get to another school. Last year and this year, we've made adjustments because we've had those encounters. And so, we'll have a child who is at high school A, but their sibling in the same household now reflects that they should be at high school B. And so we've actually given permission, shall I say, for that child to continue in the school with their sibling. It wouldn't make sense to have 2 children in one household going to 2 different high schools. And we've also taken that into consideration as well for neighborhoods. And so we've had a couple of those incidents that were brought to our attention, unbeknownst to us, that was happening. And to your point about the participation of staff and our board as well, with whomever or whatever direction we go in terms of a consultant, we have to be involved and engaged. While that consultant should be the expert in the work, we are the ones who are, even with Mr. Jones, familiar with our territory and familiar with our communities, and will also bring a historical perspective to many of them as well. But, whomever the consultant is, and I guess I'm speaking from experience, in the place where I came from, we had to do boundary shifts probably once or twice a year. And when you have a county that's that large, it is a massive lift. And so I just will remind us to roll up our sleeves and let's get ready to work and engage in the work, because it's not going to be like playing checkers or chess. Rook takes, it's a heavy lift. And so all of our voices are important in getting this work done.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, I agree. Brian, or Mr. Myers, let me ask this question. Did we get any new buses this year from the state allocation?
Yes, sir. We were able to, I believe we had 2 or 3 brand new special need buses. And these buses are equipped with the dual stop signs on them this go around.
Okay, and another question related to that. Off the top of your head, you may not have this answer, what are we looking at as the typical age of our fleet of buses now?
Actually, we're doing pretty good. I think our oldest buses now are about 2009, as opposed to 1999, maybe like 2 years ago. So we're doing much better.
Glad to hear that. All right, now, did the state follow through on equipping the buses with the GPS?
They're actually in the process of doing that now. There are some counties or some districts that are piloting the program. It is my understanding, I don't know the exact date, but it is my understanding that they will begin to do that soon.
Good. All right, any comments from committee members on those 2?
I'll just make a point. As you're aware, I am a former student of the district, and transportation was one of those things that became an issue when it came to family. Where I live in the river portion of the county, I was zoned to go to one school, and down the hill from me, they were zoned to go to a completely different school. So if someone missed a bus or someone needed to ride to school, you could potentially, being in that same area or being in that same community, potentially be going to 2 separate schools and have 2 separate paths to getting to school. And my ride would have been shorter, but the other person's ride would have been twice as long. And I know I know we're gonna have to look at as well the placement of bus stops, especially in the rural portions of the county. A lot of our bus stops are on major thoroughfares in the county, and becomes a public safety. And I know it was something that came up during the legislative advocacy conference about stopping on roads and ticketing of drivers that pass school buses. But it goes on a lot in our county because of the rural nature of this district. So I'm ready to get to work, and hopefully we can have more of those voices of students and former students, and Dr. Baker, your expertise with that as well, to start making a difference and a change when it comes to our transportation needs of our district.
And that's a good point, going back to the point that Cheryl made about the kids riding past one school. And this goes back to the uniqueness of these corners of the county. because I mentioned the three schools that my community has the choice of, is Rafton Creek Elementary, Ebenezer Middle, and Crestwood High. But that line separates those kids coming out of Rafton Creek Elementary, and part of them, a small part of them, will go to Hillcrest Middle. The rest of them, the bulk of them, will go to Ebenezer Middle. So that's one that it's historical. It's whenever the old districts existed and whenever the new high schools were built, and we used Highway 378 sort of as the divider, and then we went out and split up things. So it's past time for it to be addressed. It's past time, and exactly the scenario you gave was so typical for that particular area. So we got a lot of work, I guess, ahead of us, but I think it's a task that's going to be difficult because of the geographic makeup of the county. But I think it's a task that's not insurmountable. We can accomplish a lot with it. All right, I guess that's, Amy, you'll have to help me. I've jumped all around. Committee profile,
Yes,
kind of
sir.
cover who's on that.
Transportation now?
I guess we got a review of transportation.
Yes, sir.
And so that brings us to
That's moving forward.
steps moving forward.
Well, I had another
Oh,
issue
yes,
I
ma'am.
wanted to bring up. This, committee was sort of a result of the issues with the bus driver pay last year. And I wanted to know where we were with that, and, I know we had, some misunderstandings about pay and, the issues where they, weren't clear about how they were, determining the salary. So could you kind of fill us in on that now?
Sure. So fortunately, the matter was brought to our attention, and what we did is we offered several opportunities for our drivers to come and speak with and work with Ms. Miller and with Dr. Kumis, just to make sure there were no missteps. And fortunately and unfortunately, we found some that were missteps. However, the biggest concern was the rate of pay in comparison to surrounding school districts. And so when we did the work around the salaries in other districts that were like ours, Ms. Miller, what would bring back to attention, when we did the chart when I first arrived with the districts around us and the rate of pay, we were above where the state was, but below where many of the other districts were. So there was a rate of pay, there's a recommendation from the state, we're above that recommendation. But when you're looking at others, our neighboring school districts, we're below many of them. And so, Jennifer, do you remember those numbers and the percentage, or Mr. Jones or Mr. Myers?
I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but I do know that some of the questions we had were that those employees just paid strictly the hours that they're working, and there were some other factors to take into consideration. So we were not necessarily, we did not know if we were comparing apples to apples.
And so to piggyback on what she shared, there was a concern that some of the drivers felt as though they were working beyond their hours and weren't being compensated. The drivers were on a salaried scale. And the reason they were on a salaried scale is because during the winter, and if there was inclement weather days and school closure days, if they weren't on a salary, they would not have been compensated for those days when school was closed. And so that was just a matter of us having dialogue with our drivers individually and looking at each person's file and looking at their rate of pay, just to ensure that there were no errors. And so that was one of the things we wanted to make sure, is that there were no errors, and we just weren't giving a blanket statement to say, oh, it's okay. We did find a couple of individuals who had come into the district, and they may have been started on a different level of the scale that they should have been. But we had 2 or 3, maybe, Mr. Myers, we had a small number of drivers who said, no, I want to be hourly. And before the change was made, I said, bring them in and explain what this would look like if they went hourly. And it would also impact their benefits and their health insurance and they would have to pay out of pocket for it. So it was just a matter of communicating with them what it was, and I think we still had one that said, no, I wanna be hourly, and I believe they came back and said, nope, change me back. And so we wound up able to, it was just not knowing, and so we were able to communicate with them. And there was another piece that we have been working on, and that's the transportation manual. And so there was a transportation manual that was developed some years ago, and it hadn't been adjusted over the years in print, but by mouth it was. And so there was controversy over whether they get 2 hours before or after for cleaning and taking care of their buses, and then there was a belief that there was 3 hours. And so Mr. Jones and Mr. Myers, you can take that from there. I usually stop when I'm out of my lane, and I swerved a long time ago. So if you two can jump on right there for me, please.
There is an opportunity for drivers to, well, in the manual itself, it did give those varying descriptions, but it's been worked out where they work to get an hour before and or an hour at the end of their time, so that that's a part of their work time as well. So we've made that adjustment, and the drivers know that, and that's still in place now. And Mr. Jones, is there anything else that I may have missed with that?
No, you're absolutely correct.
And there's another piece, when we had the mileage piece, when we went from just doing it for paper and pencil to using the tracking devices for the buses being on the road. Mr. Jones, you want to talk about that for me, please?
Right, absolutely. We installed time pads on the buses actually, and to piggyback off what Mr. Myers just said, the drivers, when they arrive in the morning, they time in on their bus, they do their pre-trip, which consists of walking around the bus and all of those good things. He or she drives his or her route, and once they return, then they do their post-trip. That gives them their allotted amount of time in the mornings, and then they do it again in the afternoon. They reverse that process. And so once they time out on the time pads, it gives us a little bit more accurate feel of what the driver, he or she is doing on his or her route.
And so when we shifted from individuals taking and documenting their time to the time pads, there was a difference between the two. And so we had to explain that and explore opportunities for that as well. Now, since we've been in the pandemic and we've been virtual, we don't use drivers. But one of the things that I made very clear is that I did not want us laying off anyone, and I didn't want anyone unemployed. And so what we've done is we found various positions around the district for them to be able to work and still receive compensation. So they've been able to fill in. I think we have a few now who are at the front desk because we have others who have been quarantined or isolated and they're not present. So we just utilize our wonderful drivers wherever there's a space or wherever work that needs to be done. Because the last thing I want to do is say, you are not being compensated because we're virtual. You didn't create this situation, so why should you be penalized for it? I think, is there anything else that I may have missed?
That's it. You've done a great job.
Thank you.
Okay, thank y'all. All right, we're down to recommendation steps moving forward. Committee?
I think Brian already made recommendations for us moving forward with getting somebody come in and do it with.
I think we should be doing two things at once. I think we should be looking at securing an outside consultant, but also tasking our transportation department with the groundwork of, or laying the foundation, I should say, of looking at actual routes and things of that sort.
Sure.
Well, and one thing, before we go too much further, we need to get the rest of our committee together.
Yeah.
So that would be.
And now time-wise, Dr. Martin Knox, how much time would you need to kind of come back with some names?
Dr. Hafner was writing when we were talking, so she probably already sent the text message or the email to our principals to get that information. I think we gave them about a week the last time, to get names, and they may use the same names that they had given us previously. So I think the last time we did maybe about 2 weeks, and this time maybe about a week. What do you think, Dr. Hafner?
I can ask them, I haven't sent out my update for today yet, so I can ask them tonight to submit some suggestions.
Okay, so give them about a week?
Yeah, I think that'd be fine.
All right, let me come back to committee then. So we're looking at a meeting next month about this time, or I say next month, that'll be February or maybe March. What y'all think? Or the end of February?
Either one, end of February or first of March, I mean, February's a short month.
I think if, Dr. Martin Knox, if you can notify us, maybe in your superintendent briefing, that you have secured the names or whatever, then we can go from there as far as scheduling.
And schedule a meeting
Sure.
based around that, okay?
Sure.
All right, very good. And recommendations, Amy, you've got that, what we'll report back to the board at our
Yes, sir.
next meeting, whenever it's appropriate on the board's agenda. All right, that gets us down to, and we pretty much firm on our recommendations. We know what we're gonna move forward with. Consent agenda.
Approval minutes.
Say again?
It's the approval.
Approval minutes.
Upon consent.
Yeah, upon consent. So is there any heartburn about the minutes or approving them by consent? Everybody okay with that? Okay. All right. Again, I want to thank everybody for your participation, staff, and certainly committee members and Dr. Martin Knox. I know your time is valuable, and we appreciate you sharing this information, most important information to us as we move forward as a committee. And with anyone having any closing comments from the staff or Dr. Martin Knox or committee members? Okay. Well, we will consider the committee meeting adjourned. Thank you.
47.
Trying to keep